The champagne glass shattered against the marble floor of the Whitfield Grand Ballroom, and 300 heads turned at once. "Get her out of here," Marcus Doyle said into the microphone, not even bothering to lower his voice. "My wife was just leaving." Elena Doyle stood frozen in her blue cocktail dress, the one Marcus had picked out for her that morning because he said tonight was the biggest night of our lives. Cameras from 2 business networks were rolling. Investors in tailored suits held their drinks midair, watching. And her husband of 9 years, the man she had put through business school on a waitress's tips, was pointing security guards toward her like she was an intruder at her own coronation. "Marcus," she said quietly, "what are you doing?" "I'm doing what I should have done years ago," he said, adjusting his cufflinks, the ones she had bought him for their 5th anniversary. "The deal is signed, $35.6 million, and it's mine, not ours, mine." The room didn't gasp. The room went silent, the kind of silence that's worse than screaming. Elena felt a security guard's hand close gently but firmly around her upper arm. She looked at Marcus one last time, searching his face for even a flicker of the man she married. She found nothing, just a stranger in an expensive suit, smiling for cameras that would run this story on the evening news. 7 days, she whispered to herself as they walked her to the door. "Give me 7 days." She had no idea, yet just how right that number would turn out to be. If this story has already got your heart racing, hit that subscribe button right now, because what happens in the next 7 days is going to make you want to stand up and cheer. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I read every single one. Rewind 11 years. Elena Reyes-Doyle, 24 years old, worked the closing shift at a diner off the interstate outside Austin, Texas, pouring coffee for truckers and ignoring the ache in her feet, saving every spare dollar in a coffee can under her bed. She met Marcus Doyle on a rainy Tuesday when his car broke down outside the diner and he walked in soaked to the bone, ordering black coffee because it was the only thing he could afford. "You have kind eyes," he told her that first night, sliding his last $5 across the counter as a tip he clearly couldn't spare. "I'm going to build something someday, something big." She believed him. She had always believed in people who dreamed bigger than their circumstances because she was one of them. Marcus had an idea for a logistics software company, something that could track shipping routes more efficiently than anything on the market. He had the vision. He had none of the money, none of the credentials, and none of the patience required to build something from nothing. Elena had all 3. She worked double shifts at the diner while he coded in their 1-bedroom apartment. She took out a loan against her father's old truck to buy him a proper laptop. She learned bookkeeping from library books so they wouldn't have to pay an accountant they couldn't afford. "When this takes off," Marcus told her, holding her hands across their second-hand kitchen table, "everything is 50-50. You built this with me. I don't forget things like that." She believed that too. For 7 years, Elena was the invisible architecture of Doyle Logistics Solutions. She was the one who chased down late-paying clients when Marcus wanted to write them off. She was the one who negotiated their first office lease down by 40% because the landlord liked her better than him. She was the one who sat up until 3 in the morning 3 separate times rewriting investor pitch decks Marcus had built wrong, softening his arrogance into confidence on paper, because raw ambition doesn't raise capital, careful strategy does. "I don't know what I'd do without you," Marcus used to say, back when he still meant it. Something shifted around year 8. Elena couldn't point to the exact day it happened, only that it happened slowly, the way water finds a crack in a foundation and widens it a little more with every season. Marcus started taking meetings without telling her. He started introducing her at events as my wife instead of my co-founder, a distinction she noticed immediately, and he pretended not to understand when she raised it. "You're overreacting," he told her the first time she brought it up, over dinner at a restaurant he'd chosen because investors might be there. "Nobody wants to hear about internal company structure at a dinner party, Elena, relax." She didn't relax. She started paying closer attention instead. The real crack came 14 months before that night in the ballroom, when a man named Preston Ashworth walked into their offices for the first time. Preston represented Ashworth Capital Ventures, a private investment firm quietly backed by one of the most powerful and reclusive billionaires in American finance, a man named Julian Vance, who almost never appeared in public and almost never invested directly under his own name. "We are interested in Doyle Logistics," Preston told Marcus over their first lunch meeting, one Elena wasn't invited to, one she only found out about because she saw the calendar invite Marcus forgot to delete. "But we do our diligence carefully. We look at everything, every contract, every founder, every piece of the story." Marcus came home that night electric with excitement, packing their kitchen, talking faster than Elena had heard him talk in years. "This could be it," he said. "This could be the deal that changes everything." "Our deal," Elena said carefully. "Right." Marcus paused just half a second too long before answering. "Of course, ours." She should have trusted her instincts in that pause. She didn't, not yet. She wanted to believe in the man she'd built a life with too badly to let herself see what was already forming in front of her. Over the following months, something in Marcus hardened into someone she barely recognized. He started scheduling meetings with Preston that conveniently overlapped with times Elena had client calls of her own. He started referring to the company in interviews as something he built, using I where he used to use we. A trade publication ran a profile calling him a self-made visionary in logistics technology, and when Elena asked why her name wasn't mentioned anywhere in the piece, Marcus told her the reporter must have simply run out of space. She started keeping records after that, quietly, every contract she'd negotiated, every investor deck she'd rebuilt from scratch, every late-paying client she'd personally chased down for six-figure invoices that kept their doors open during their leanest years. She backed everything up on a private drive, dated, time-stamped, completely separate from the company servers. She didn't do it because she thought Marcus would betray her completely. She did it because a decade of paying attention to people had taught her that the moment you speak up too early, people simply get better at hiding what they're doing. 9 months before the ballroom, Elena discovered something that made the floor tilt beneath her. Buried in a legal folder Marcus had left open on his laptop while he showered, she found a founder's agreement amendment drafted just 3 weeks earlier, quietly reducing her equity stake from 50% to 8%. Her signature was on it. She had never signed it. She sat at their kitchen table until 4 in the morning that night, staring at that signature, tracing the loops of the E in Elena that weren't quite hers, close enough to fool a casual glance, wrong enough to make her stomach drop the moment she looked closely. 8%, she whispered to the empty kitchen, after everything. That was the night Elena Reyes-Doyle stopped being a wife, hoping her marriage would improve, and became a woman quietly building a case. If you think Elena should have confronted Marcus the second she found that forged signature, drop a 1 in the comments. If you think staying quiet and gathering proof first was the smarter move, drop a 2. I want to know where you stand, because it's about to matter more than you think. Elena hired an independent forensic document examiner under a name that had nothing to do with the company, paying in cash from an account Marcus didn't know existed, one she'd quietly opened 3 years earlier just in case, back when just in case was still a feeling she couldn't fully explain to herself. The examiner confirmed what she already knew. The signature was forged, and forged recently, likely within the same month the amendment was dated. She didn't confront Marcus, not yet. Instead, she reached out, carefully and anonymously at first, to Preston Ashworth's office, requesting a private meeting under the pretense of discussing operational continuity ahead of the funding round. Preston agreed, mostly out of professional courtesy, clearly expecting a routine conversation. What he got instead was 2 hours of documentation that changed everything. Elena laid it all out across the conference table of a quiet law office she'd retained under her maiden name. Every contract she'd personally negotiated with her actual signature beside it. Every investor deck with track changes showing her handwriting in the margins, restructuring Marcus's raw ideas into fundable strategy. The forged equity amendment beside a forensic report confirming it wasn't her signature. And finally, an email chain, recovered from a company backup Marcus had forgotten still existed, between him and Preston, discussing plans to structure the incoming $35 million investment entirely around Marcus as sole founder, with Elena quietly phased out within 6 months under the label operational restructuring. Preston sat back in his chair for a long moment after she finished, saying nothing. "Why are you showing me this now?" he finally asked, instead of stopping the deal before it started. "Because I wanted you to see exactly who you'd actually be investing in," Elena said. "Not the story he tells at dinner parties, the truth, all of it." Preston studied her for a long moment. "Julian Vance doesn't take many direct meetings," he said slowly, "but I think he's going to want to hear this one himself." Julian Vance was 63 years old, worth an estimated $11 billion, and famously allergic to press coverage, boardroom theater, and founders who mistook charisma for competence. He had built his fortune quietly over 4 decades, and the one rule his firm operated by, the rule that had made him nearly impossible to fool twice, was simple. He invested in the person who actually built the thing, not the person standing loudest in front of the cameras when the thing succeeded. Elena didn't know any of this yet. All she knew, standing in that ballroom 7 days before the story truly began, watching security walk her toward the exit while her husband smiled for cameras and toasted a deal built on her decade of invisible labor and a forged signature, was that she had already handed Preston Ashworth everything he needed 3 days earlier. She just didn't know yet how fast the ground was about to shift beneath Marcus's feet. If this story already has you sitting on the edge of your seat, smash that like button right now and make sure you're subscribed, because the next 7 days are going to hit different. I promise you that. Day 1 after the ballroom, Elena sat in a hotel room she'd booked under her maiden name, staring at the ceiling, replaying Marcus's voice in her head. "My wife was just leaving. 9 years reduced to a sentence delivered for cameras." Her phone rang at 8 the next morning. Preston Ashworth. "Are you sitting down?" he asked. "I'm always sitting down when men call me this early," Elena said, and even she was surprised there was still enough of herself left to make a joke. "Julian wants to meet with you personally, today, if possible." Elena's hand tightened around the phone. "Why?" "Because he watched a video of what happened at that gala last night," Preston said. "It's already circulating in finance circles, Elena, and Julian Vance has one thing he cares about more than almost anything else in this business. He cares about who actually builds things. He's not interested in funding a man who forges his co-founder's signature and humiliates her in front of cameras the same week he closes a deal she made possible." Elena closed her eyes. "The deal's already signed, Preston." "The deal has a 60-day contingency clause tied to founder integrity and disclosure accuracy," Preston said. "Standard language nobody reads carefully until they need it. Julian's lawyers are reading it very carefully this morning." Day 2, Elena sat across from Julian Vance in a glass conference room 40 floors above the city, a room so quiet she could hear her own heartbeat. Julian was smaller than she expected, silver-haired, dressed like a man who'd forgotten what expensive fabric felt like decades ago because he no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. "Tell me what you actually built," Julian said, no preamble, no small talk. Not what he told investors, what you actually did with your own hands, your own time. So Elena told him. She told him about the coffee can under her bed and the loan against her father's truck. She told him about rewriting pitch decks at 3 in the morning and chasing down 6-figure invoices from clients who thought they could outweight a young woman half their age. She told him about learning bookkeeping from library books because they couldn't afford an accountant and negotiating their first office lease down by 40%. And every late night that built the architecture nobody in that ballroom had bothered to thank her for. Julian listened without interrupting once. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, turning a pen slowly between his fingers. "I've backed 41 founders in my career," he finally said. 11 of them failed within 2 years. You know what almost every single failure had in common? Elena shook her head. "The person taking credit in public wasn't the person who'd actually done the work in private, Julian said. I don't fund stories, Mrs. Doyle. I fund people. And based on everything in this folder Preston showed me, and based on the last 40 minutes sitting across from you, I think I've been backing the wrong person's name on the paperwork. Elena's breath caught in her throat. What are you saying? I'm saying the $35.6 million deal closes in 58 days if the contingency clause isn't triggered, Julian said. I'm saying it's about to be triggered. And I'm saying when the dust settles, I'd like to discuss restructuring that investment around the person who actually built Doyle Logistics from a coffee can and a broken-down car. That's you, Elena. It was always you. If you've made it this far and this story already has your jaw on the floor, comment right now and tell me what you think Marcus's reaction is going to be when he finds out. I promise you it's coming, and it's not pretty. Day 3, Marcus called Elena for the first time since the ballroom, his voice tight with the particular panic of a man who has just realized the ground he's standing on isn't as solid as he thought. Elena, we need to talk. Ashworth's lawyers are asking questions about the founders' agreement. Did you say something to them? I said the truth, Elena replied, calm in a way that seemed to unsettle him more than anger would have. That's all I've ever said, Marcus. You're the one who's had a problem with it. You're going to destroy everything I built, he snapped. Everything you built, Elena repeated slowly. That's interesting phrasing for a company where my signature was forged onto a document reducing my ownership from 50% to 8%. Silence on the line, long enough that Elena almost thought the call had dropped. I can explain that, Marcus finally said, his voice smaller now. I'd love to hear you try, Elena said. Preston would too. So would the forensic examiner who confirmed it wasn't my handwriting. So would Julian Vance, actually, since he's the one asking most of the questions right now. She could hear something crack in Marcus's voice when he spoke again. Something that almost sounded like the man she married a decade ago, briefly surfacing before disappearing again beneath the version of him that had learned to want being ahead more than he'd ever learned to want being loved. Elena, please, we had something real. We did, Elena said quietly, echoing words she didn't even know yet would become the truest sentence of her life. You're the one who decided a forged signature and a ballroom full of cameras was worth more than it. She hung up before he could respond. Day 4, the story broke publicly, not because Elena leaked it, but because a junior associate at Ashworth Capital, stunned by what he'd read in the contingency clause investigation, mentioned it to a reporter he happened to be dating. By that evening, business outlets were running headlines asking uncomfortable questions about Doyle Logistics Solutions and its recently finalized $35 million funding round. Marcus's phone, according to people who saw him that week, did not stop ringing. Reporters wanted comment. Investors wanted clarity. His own board, the one he'd quietly stacked with loyalists over the preceding year, wanted answers he didn't have. Day 5, Preston called Elena again, this time with something closer to excitement in his voice than she'd heard from him yet. The forensic report is airtight, he said. Julian's team has reviewed everything. The board is moving to freeze the current funding structure entirely pending a full ownership audit. And what happens to the deal? Elena asked. That depends entirely on what you want to happen next, Preston said. Day 6, Elena sat once more across from Julian Vance in that same glass conference room, 40 floors above a city that had spent the last week watching her marriage and her company unravel in headlines she never asked for. I've made my decision, Julian said, sliding a folder across the table toward her. Ashworth Capital is prepared to restructure the entire $35.6 million investment around new terms. Elena Reyes as majority founder and controlling shareholder, 61% ownership reflecting your actual contribution and the forged reduction being formally voided. Marcus Doyle remains on as a minority technical contributor if he agrees to the new terms, though frankly, I suspect he won't. Elena stared at the folder, her hands not quite steady as she opened it. Why me? She asked quietly. You could have walked away from this entire mess. Simpler deals exist. Julian leaned back in his chair, studying her the way a man studies something he's finally certain of after decades of practice reading people who wanted his money. Because in 40 years of doing this, he said, I've learned that the person who survives being underestimated for a decade and still shows up with documentation instead of destruction, still shows up asking for the truth instead of revenge, that's the person who builds things that actually last. You didn't come into my office wanting to burn Marcus down, Elena. You came in wanting the truth on record. That tells me everything I need to know about how you'll run this company when nobody's watching. Elena felt something in her chest loosen for the first time in 9 years, a knot she hadn't fully realized she'd been carrying since a rainy Tuesday outside a diner in Austin, Texas. I accept, she said. If this story is giving you chills right now, hit that like button, subscribe if you somehow haven't yet, and tell me in the comments what you think Marcus does when he finds out he's just been replaced by his own wife in a $35 million deal. Day 7, exactly 1 week after security walked Elena out of the Whitfield Grand Ballroom in front of 300 people and 2 news cameras. Marcus Doyle received formal notice that Ashworth Capital Ventures, backed by Julian Vance, had restructured its entire investment in what would now legally be renamed Reyes Logistics Solutions, with Elena Reyes-Doyle as majority founder, controlling shareholder, and chief executive officer. He called her 4 times that afternoon. She let all 4 calls go to voicemail. On the 5th call, she finally picked up. You can't do this to me, Marcus said, his voice cracking in a way she'd genuinely never heard from him before, not once in 9 years. I built this company. You built a version of this company that only existed because I was standing behind you catching everything you dropped, Elena said, her voice steady, almost gentle, the same gentle Simone Reyes had once used ordering someone fired over the phone, the particular calm of a woman who no longer needed to raise her voice to be heard. I stopped catching things 7 days ago, Marcus. Watch what happens now that you're on your own. Elena, please, we can fix this. We can talk. I'll fix the paperwork. I'll give back the equity. Just don't do this publicly, don't. You had 9 years to be honest with me, Elena said. You chose a forged signature and a ballroom full of cameras instead. I'm done being quiet about what that cost me. She hung up the phone and set it face down on the table. 3 weeks later, Reyes Logistics Solutions officially closed its restructured $35.6 million funding round, with Julian Vance personally attending the signing, a rarity industry insiders noted immediately, since he almost never appeared at deal closings in person. Preston Ashworth stood beside Elena in the photograph that ran in 2 major business publications the following morning, both of them smiling, neither of them mentioning Marcus's name once in either interview. Marcus was quietly bought out of his remaining minority stake 4 months later, at a valuation considerably lower than the one he'd stood on a stage, bragging about the night he had Elena escorted out of a ballroom in front of cameras. The last anyone heard, he was consulting for a mid-sized regional shipping firm in a state Elena had never once visited during their marriage. Elena didn't think about him much anymore. She thought about the coffee can under her bed sometimes, and the loan against her father's old truck, and every 3 a.m. she'd spent rebuilding someone else's dream into something that could actually survive contact with reality. She thought about how nobody in that ballroom had known, watching security walk her toward the exit, that she'd already handed the truth to exactly the right person 3 days earlier. On a quiet evening 6 months after the ballroom, Elena stood on the balcony of her new office, 31 floors up, watching the city lights flicker on one by one. Preston found her there after most of the staff had gone home. Regrets? He asked, leaning against the railing beside her. Just one, Elena said. I wish I hadn't waited 9 years to trust myself enough to keep records from the very beginning. You trusted yourself exactly when it mattered, Preston said. That's usually enough. Elena thought about that for a long moment, watching the last of the sunset catch gold across the river the same way it always had, indifferent to whatever had happened beneath it that day. It is enough, she finally said. It's more than enough. This story is a reminder that the people who build quietly in the background are rarely the ones standing at the microphone when the applause starts, but they're almost always the ones still standing when the applause fades and the truth finally gets read out loud. If someone in your life has ever tried to erase what you built by writing you out of your own story, don't scream about it. Document it. Wait for the moment it actually matters, and then let the truth do what it does best. If this story moved you, make sure you're subscribed, drop a like on your way out, and tell me in the comments what part hit you the hardest. I read every single one, and I'll see you in the next story.